Now, if I'm going down a runway and I attach myself to an electric sled or something like that, I can get the rocket plane going 200 miles per hour, and I never burned a single ounce of rocket fuel because I'm able to couple that energy from a ground-based system to achieve that first initial boost.
How you doing, Tom?
Good. Nice to meet you.
This is exciting. We're gonna have a great time. Are you pumped up?
Hey, I'm working on rockets, I'm pumped up every day.
I know. I just actually watched the video of the SpaceX test explosion yesterday. How did that make you feel?
It's very inspiring, obviously. I think anyone involved in this profession to see stuff on that scale going on is really cool. Of course, I was an early SpaceX employee, so there's always some connection, I feel back to what they're doing.
Yeah, and because now you have your own space company, what happens when you do a test like that? You get a bunch of data that you can, I read in an article that you get a bunch of useful data. And what is that, just to make sure it doesn't crash the next time?
Well, you'll generate terabytes of data. You'll go back to what your goals were for the test to begin with. And first of all, you'll determine, whether you got all the data you needed to evaluate whether you met your goals or not. So that's kind of the first level. And then the next level is to look for anomalous things in the data that would suggest there were problems that were not anticipated. So those are the two major things.
And when you got to work at these other companies, what inspired you? At what point were you like, I want to go do my own thing?
Well, really, my background is really a technologist. I have a PhD in aerospace and mechanical engineering, but primarily working on plasma physics from Princeton. And I always thought I'd be working on warp drive and things like that. I learned eventually that for all that cool stuff to see the light of day, or the light of the sun, really, you needed to figure out how to get to space first. So we had to really lick this getting to orbit problem, and met Elon and got to participate in the first launch of Falcon 1 way back, and realized that something new and transformative was going on here, and that I could spend my energy and really substantively contribute by helping that to happen. But after we were successful, it became clear to me that it needed to be about a movement, not about just SpaceX. So I decided to go out and try to help the next company become the next SpaceX. And I worked for a couple of really cool companies, but I just didn't really feel like they were going to reproduce the magic. So it was at that point that I kind of made the leap of faith and decided to start Firefly. It was never like the long-term plan or anything like that. It just after those experiences, it became clear to me that if there was going to be another SpaceX, I had to be proactive and go and doing it myself.
Because of the culture, right? Like the people.
It's a lot of blend of things. If I were to kind of characterize SpaceX in just a couple words, it would be, applying a Silicon Valley development approach to aerospace. And Elon did that in just an extraordinary way. And I haven't seen anyone since then do it. And so that's what we're trying to do here at Firefly. And to be clear, we're not trying to build a company that's competitive with SpaceX. We're looking at a whole different niche of the market, a rapidly growing niche of the market, but just trying to create a company that has the diverse technology portfolio, the cost structure, and the spirit of what they're doing.
They also look really cool. When I got to see your vehicles, we were sharing them around in our Slack channels, and we were like the test fires and stuff. It just sounds like a kid in the candy shop. Sounds so much fun.
It is, absolutely. We're really fortunate to live at a time when there's this real renaissance in space. If you think about in the past, everyone that was interested in this, you had to land a job at NASA or some big aerospace company to be involved. But now you literally have grassroots efforts to go to space going on, which is just nothing like this has ever happened in history. So it's just a really incredible time to be living and working on space right now. Yeah.
Now, when you started, did you self-fund? Did you raise capital? How did it start?
Yes. I think I'm a pretty good engineer. not a very good businessman, or it certainly started with like no experience. So had to learn along the way. But I surrounded myself with some financially savvy people. But yes, Firefly started very much like any other startup. So you have your seed investors, which ends up being a lot of friends and family, and you have that seed round. The thing that's different about rockets is it's super capital intensive. So I'm here in Austin, Texas, which is just an awesome place for building companies, and there's just all kinds of startup activity going on. And I went to some of those groups and was hanging out with them, and it just became very clear to me that I was doing something very different when you're in those groups and they're talking about, really trying to close their seed round, and it's $200,000. And my seed round was $20 million that I was trying to close, and it's like, so my first business endeavor turned out to be probably one of the most capital intensive and risky business ventures that you can conceive of doing. So it's really been kind of a true bath by fire, and we've had our ups and downs along the way, believe me.
And so what's the business model? Is it shipping? Is it infrastructure play? Like what's the business model? How do you make money?
Well, we provide a service, and the need for services is rapidly growing. There's projected to be about 100,000 satellites launched in the next decade. Of doing all kinds of amazing things for humanity, and all kinds of business and defense and exploration opportunities. The one thing that all of those applications have in common is the need for space transportation, how to get there. So we really focused Firefly, at least initially, very much on the space transportation problem. And the first part of that is the launch vehicle, getting from the Earth to Earth orbit. The next part is moving around in space, and then the third part is landing on a foreign body like the moon. So at Firefly, we're trying to provide end-to-end solutions. So all three of those facets of the mission we can support from one company. So we have, for example, our Alpha launch vehicle, which is going to launch next month, which, that's been
nice.
years in the making. But also on that first Alpha flight, we're flying what we call our SUV, Space Utility Vehicle. So that is a in-space transportation vehicle that allows you to go to higher orbits with your satellite, or go to the moon, or do servicing or refueling, all kinds of things. So the prototype of that is actually flying on our first flight as well. And then the third piece is we have a Genesis, what's called our Genesis lander, which is a lunar lander that can take payloads up to about 150 kilograms to the surface of the moon. We're part of a group of companies that have been writing proposals for those missions, and one of those is actually going to be awarded likely this month. So we're excited and enthusiastic, hopeful that we'll get that Genesis contract. And so next year, you're looking at really Firefly, A to Z, realizing that end-to-end dream of space transportation. So transportation is the focus. If you have the ability to get to space, you have the keys to space. And very few companies, governments in the world have the keys to space. Very few. So when you have that, then you can start thinking about doing all kinds of diverse business ventures in space. And again, you look at SpaceX, they have the launch vehicle, then the Dragon spacecraft, then the Human Dragon spacecraft, and now Starlink satellites. So they're really filling out that ecosystem, business ecosystem as well. And so we plan on following a similar path. We don't have any aspirations for building, large scale satellite constellations or anything like that, but we're really going to master the transportation part of it, again, end to end, which is different. So I just want to make sure everybody realizes Firefly is not just about launch vehicles. It's about the whole journey.
Where are you launching from?
So our initial launch will be from Vandenberg Air Force Base this at the beginning of next year. But we're also building or getting ready to build up our Launch Complex 20 at Cape Canaveral. And we're also in discussions to deploy launch capability internationally.
That's pretty cool. So if you want to launch like at Cape Canaveral, do you just call them up and pay them a fee for the bay or whatever it's called? Or how do you get the ability to launch?
It's a partnership, really. It's a very complicated, dangerous business. So there are all kinds of regulations, which are, in there for good reason. They're not just, handicapping you. But it's a process, long conversations going through everything initially from environmental impact studies. Like, okay, we're going to go do this. How's that going to affect the natural environment around there? And that goes all the way up to, building, construction, safety protocols in place, and then the actual hazards associated with the rocket flying around. It's a huge amount of work that goes in up front. But then, yes, eventually you do end up on launch day, and you pretty much pay daily to do what's called bringing up the range. And that's them going in, the government going in, setting up their radar stations, their communication capability, making sure that if the rocket gets off course, that it can be destroyed, and before it impacts anything of value or where people are. So that's how they get involved on the launch day. The neat thing is that everything is moving toward autonomous systems. So what that means is at some point, you won't have to have that oversight of the rocket. The rocket is programmed, has its own onboard equipment to make its own decisions about whether it's, got a problem and to take care of it itself. And that's really going to dramatically lower the requirement for the range to have as many people are involved in every launch. And it will also, I think, increase the ability for these ranges to have more launches from more companies more frequently, because there's just less human interaction involved. And the last thing I'd say on that is that the FAA is also involved in this, since you're flying around and you have to make sure flight corridors are cleared and things like that. And General Monteith at the FAA has really been kind of instrumental in modernizing that and trying to get launch vehicles treated in the same system that other aircraft moving around in airspace are treated, so that you can kind of streamline that. It's not like a special thing. It's just another, aircraft going through some flight space that needs to be scheduled with everything else that's moving around.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That makes sense though, right? Like, it's just another vehicle in the air coming in and out. It's just the altitude and the position of it.
Yeah.
So when you were going through like your initial business, was it all smooth sailing, or did you have like rough moments getting it off the ground?
Oh, it's been 6 years of continual rough moments. It's never been easy, and it never from day one. It's been super hard, and it's ultimate. I mean, it's just, I think, a constant in the universe, though. It's an extraordinary thing to be able to even work on this sort of stuff. But it's like Ringo Starr said in the song, if you want to sing the blues, you got to pay your dues. And it's incredibly hard work. It's incredibly expensive, like I said. I've had to raise now over $200 million to do this. And to get people to sign up to do that takes a lot of trust. And so the technical challenges are obvious. They're difficult. But to some extent, that's just a matter of having experience and iterating, working effectively as a team. So there are these internal challenges. But then the external challenges, which are really where the funding comes into focus, that's even more challenging, because to a large extent you can't control that. You have to go out there and sell. So there's a lot of selling involved in this, and maybe to an extent that I didn't realize. But you're always selling people on the vision. You're always also just differentiating, right? Because in the marketplace of ideas out there, people have money, they have to choose, right? So there's a lot of selling and differentiating yourself amongst your competitors. Then there's the regulatory aspects of it too. You have to jump through a lot of hoops. There's a lot of regulation associated with what we're doing. So that's kind of a constant thing that you're working on. The other challenge, I'd say, is on the external entities, is working with external vendors. We are what you call very vertically integrated, which means we build our rocket engines, we design them, we test them to a very large extent, and we're able to control cost and schedule really well through that vertical integration. But there are parts of the system that we don't control, that we buy from others. And very often you find that they just don't have the same mindset as you do as to what constitutes a reasonable price, what constitutes a reasonable schedule, and how accountable we should be to holding the schedule and things like that. So that can be an incredible frustration when you just find some vendor that you're critically relying on that's just like, meh, we're not too worried about it. And you're like, my company's, spending, millions of dollars a week. I can't just take a 6-week hit because, you guys are just getting around to it. So yeah, I'll tell you what, man, this is not business for someone that's interested in leading a comfortable life. But again, I just go back to, it's like the way the universe works. If you want to do something meaningful, it's gonna be hard. Yeah. But you got to believe that it ultimately, in the end, it'll all be worth it. And I think really, the world owes Elon so much. I mean, I really think of him as the Henry Ford of our time, and the fact that he did SpaceX and he gave people like me the opportunity to see where it could all end up. I'm not going blindly forward, suffering every day and with all these challenges, just, thinking maybe something cool will happen. I've seen it. I've had my fingerprint on things that I'm watching floating around in space, so I know it's possible. So he's given so many people that opportunity so that we can have second generation companies like ours that know where we're going with confidence if we work hard enough and we stick with it.
So these problems that I was reading about your company and I was reading about these, and as you were discussing these problems, I can't stop thinking about the company Stripe. Do you know what Stripe is? They're like a credit card processing company.
No, I haven't heard of them.
Okay. So they're big in like the software as a service type world. Basically before Stripe, it was very, very difficult to do credit card processing integrations as an engineer, right? Because my background's software for the past 17 years. And so it was really painful and difficult. And then Stripe came out. They were, I think they're brothers or cousins or something, but they built just an amazing API and made it ultra easy. So it took my job from an incredible amount of hours down to like, I could process transactions almost instantly, like in the same day, right? And they have grown over the past, like, I don't know, 7+ years, and they're like all billionaires now. It's the largest, I think it's the largest credit card processing solution out there. They're really big, but where they won was making it easy for the engineers, and they essentially looked at themselves as like an infrastructure company. Like, we build the pipes and the everything, and then people build on top of us. And so as you're describing all these difficulties with being reliant on vendors and things like that, have you ever thought, and you're raising money and you've got competitors and they're saying, why should we invest in you over your competitors? And there's a bunch of other companies. And you said earlier, there's like the keys it's like the key is to get up there, right? Mm-hmm. That's like step one. And then all the opportunity comes. Have you ever thought about like an infrastructure business model play where you're building these components like near cost, but enough to make some profit? So it's like reasonable. So all of these other second generation, third generation companies would just buy your stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a concept called Firefly Market where we will have a e-commerce site where you can, like in Kerbal Space Command, put together your spaceship and order the parts, and you're going to get them hopefully the next day. I definitely have a vision for that. I think there's a huge need for like a new space OEM company where you can just go and get those piece parts. I mean, it's crazy in rockets. We build our own rocket engines. We build, our own structures, everything, valves, everything from scratch. If you and I were going to go start an aircraft company tomorrow, and I said, hey, oh yeah, first we're gonna have to invent the turbojet engine. You'd be like, no, this is crazy. We just go buy that from General Electric or Pratt and Whitney. But it's not the case in rockets, which are even more complicated. It's like, okay, we're starting with rocket science 101. So we absolutely want to sell rocket engine. We will sell rocket engines. We will sell all the pieces you need to build these sorts of vehicles, and we'll make it highly available, and we will make it very low cost. So that's definitely a dream of mine. So thanks for bringing that up. And that's another thing that I think will differentiate us and will really catalyze this. Remember, I said I went into this because there needed to be more SpaceXs in the world, and having that type of availability of the equipment needed to do it could really catalyze there to be even more and more of these companies in the world. And I'm, to some extent, I'm not super competitive by nature, because I really think, when we look back at what we're doing, this will be looked at as a kind of a time in history where everything changed. And to some extent, we're all kind of brothers in arms in that change. So, I'm happy to see all kinds of companies coming up like this. And also just because I know what they've been through, I know how hard it is. And anybody that's involved in this, whether they're a competitor or not, I hold in high regard and have respect for, because I know what they're going through to try to make it happen. And these are people that aren't sensitive to the seduction of comfort. They're laying it all out there and living life to the fullest and hardest.
Well, because I always like to say it's because it's like Tuesday or whatever day of the week it might be. It's after you get to a certain point and you do enough difficult things and you realize like the feeling of growth versus just sitting around and doing nothing. It's like you just have to get up every day and do some good work, and on top of that, grow yourself. So I'm a fan of doing difficult things. I like how Musk describes it. He says like entrepreneurship, it's like staring into the abyss and eating glass, right?
Yeah. I mean, the way he puts it's actually really that's a great quote for him. But there is a preamble to that. And he basically says, when you start a company like this, the first year, it's magic. Everybody's like, woo, high fives. So we're space adventurers, exciting. But it's like when you get to year 2, that's when you're on the edge of the abyss, chewing glass, because now you're burning millions of dollars and you don't have a lot of friends, and things are blowing up. And it's a really good description.
on the phone with your backers, making them happy and easing their concerns and all of this extra overhead that you didn't really see before, but you just have to roll with it. And
then you got a lot of people out there who are just basically lying about their capabilities and where they are developmentally. I mean, as much as I say I respect everybody that works on this, and it's hard, there's just a lot of misinformation out there, and just really overly ambitious statements about schedules, like, oh yeah, we're flying next year. And, I can qualitatively look at where they are and I'm like, dude, you're not flying for 5 years, So, so you get the investors and backers who are like, well, they're flying next year. Why aren't you? It's like, because they're making it up.
I love it. So how long has it taken you to get to from when you started day 1 to first launch date? And this isn't test launch. This is like actual launch, because you're launching and then you have your secondary aircraft, or it's not aircraft, your secondary spacecraft as the payload, correct? How long has that been?
So if you go back and look at the history of Firefly, I started a company, Firefly Space Systems, in 2014. And that company folded, went bankrupt in like 2 years. So I had to start all over. So I started all over in May of 2017. So this company, Firefly Aerospace, it's been 3.5 years for us to get there. So that'd be like world record. Nobody has moved as quickly as we have from 0 to our first fully flight qualified vehicle in such a short period of time.
That's amazing. How did you come up with the name?
It's a little bit of a long story, but when I was ruminating with my last employer that they weren't going to be the next SpaceX, I was back on my back porch of my home in California, which was up on a mountainside, and it was so beautiful, our backyard. My wife would hold weddings back there for people. It was just such a beautiful environment, and she had all these lights up in the live oak trees in the backyard, and the flickering lights. And it was getting to dusk, and I just saw them flickering, and I thought, oh, they look like fireflies. I'm from Ohio originally, and we had fireflies all over. And I also just kind of in my head, I had this vision in the future, like when people are going to Mars, maybe like when they went to the West, they would go in these Conestoga wagons and caravans of these wagons, and then maybe in the 21st century that would look like they're all staged in low Earth orbit, and then all these rockets light up in low Earth orbit as they all head out to Mars, and how it would look like fireflies. And that was kind of this idea that was going around in my head. And then I was like, I've got to go start a company to do this, because I'm not happy with the way things are going with the folks I'm working for. What am I going to name the company? And I had already been thinking about fireflies because I'd seen all this. And then I just, the words of fire flying, like you're flying on fire, you know, the imagery of it was irresistible. So that's where I came up with it. And others had asked me like, oh yeah, like the television show, right? And I was like, what? I'd never seen it. But when
I haven't either. Yeah.
Yeah. When I went back and watched, there was a year, there's like a cult classic series called Firefly, and it's about space cowboys and stuff. And I think, yeah, it actually kind of resonated. I'm like, yeah, that's cool. Let's go to Texas and be space cowboys.
Let's do it. Yeah. You gave me goosebumps when you said sitting on Mars and seeing all the rocket engines and it looking like fireflies. That was like a very easily translatable like visualization for me.
Sorry, it's a long story, but that's where.
No, it's great. This is what we do. We just hang out. The idea for this show is we just kind of like hang out and we just talk like as if we were out lunch or whatever. And then our producers and stuff, they'll edit everything up and make us sound smarter than we are. So that works really well. So is Gamma, so Firefly Gamma, is that the in-space vehicle?
No, the in-space vehicle is called SUV, Space Utility Vehicle. It uses solar electric propulsion. It's very efficient. It's reusable. It just sits out there. It's kind of like the Uber for space. It sits out there when a ride is called up. It goes, picks up the ride, takes it to where it needs to go, and then it goes back to low Earth orbit and waits for the next passenger. And that could be, you know, a swarm of these SUVs sitting out there waiting to do that sort of mission. Now, Gamma would be kind of my magnum opus, and I'm getting older, but hopefully I'll get the resources to go and do Gamma soon, because I think ultimately we need to move away from these sticks going up and down in the air. I mean, just yesterday we saw, you know, SpaceX, you know, the hazards of vertical landing. You know, powered vertical landing is rough, and you know, I don't know if I would want to be in something that's doing a backflip, you know, a few hundred feet above the ground, slamming on the brakes with rocket engines. And you can see what happened. It's really hard. And I take my hat off to those guys. I mean, it's extraordinary. But I just don't agree with the basic paradigm. And I think the future should be about aircraft-like operations. I think if aliens came down from space right now and looked around, said, wow, you guys have been like flying airplanes around a lot. That's great. You have thousands or tens of thousands of airports and well, hold on, what are you doing to get to space? You have a few locations. These things don't look anything like this other, you know, area that you've perfected in flight. So why don't you just soup up, you know, an airplane to get to space instead of doing it this other inconvenient way where you're slamming on the brakes with rockets, you know, glide in, use the air around you, don't fight it. Glide in, use aerodynamic braking instead of rocket engines. The air is free. The rocket thrust is not free, and the rocket thrust, as you can see, is not necessarily 100% reliable. So I really like a paradigm where you use the air to gently come in, land on a runway, and I also like the ability to go down a runway because you can couple energy to the vehicle from the ground while you're going down a runway in a way that obviously you can't with a typical launch vehicle. Once you leave the launch pad with a normal rocket, it's hands off, right? And if you look at a vehicle like Alpha, to get Alpha moving about 200 miles per hour, it takes about 25% of its fuel, okay? Now, if I'm going down a runway and I attach myself to an electric sled or something like that, I can get the rocket plane going 200 miles per hour, and I never burned a single ounce of rocket fuel because I'm able to couple that energy from a ground-based system to achieve that first initial boost. So again, I think that is an advantage. You know, the disadvantage is of carrying wings around, extra weight and things, but those can be mitigated by the fact that you can couple energy from the ground on launch, and you can utilize the atmosphere to bleed away energy. And the last aspect that I really want to explore is the air is not only just a fluid that can be used for viscous drag and lift, but it also has rocket fuel in it. It has oxygen in it. So why do we just push it out of the way? Why don't we, like we do in aircraft, suck it into the engines and utilize that oxygen for propulsion? So that's, air breathing propulsion, high speed air breathing propulsion, scramjets, ramjets, hypersonic propulsion, these things, we've worked on, but no one has ever employed in a space launch vehicle. So if I have an opportunity, and this current work doesn't kill me, which some days it feels like it will, I'm certain I'll have the energy to go do something that I would find, like I said, that would be the magnum opus of my career, to be able to do that type of paradigm changing architecture. And I actually think I'm pretty close to figuring out a way to be able to go do that. So stay tuned.
What's your like fitness and nutrition schedule like, given, I mean, I'm an entrepreneur, I work very hard, and I say that I train like an athlete for the work I do, right? Because it's incredibly intensive, from the stress, the finances, being responsible for employees and their families and as an income stream. And there's just so much weight, experience helps you manage it better. But for me, I've just come up with strict like nutrition and fitness routines that make it so that the stress is manageable, right? So I have a quality of life. You are same position, but just larger scale. Like, are you doing stuff for that? Like, how do you handle it?
No, I probably sleep, 5 or 6 hours a day. And I try to take like Sunday off, or at least part of it. But my wife and I try to walk a few miles every day. I try to make sure I don't get overweight. I really think like antioxidants are pretty powerful. That's something I take antioxidants. I drink a lot of tea, and I'm 50 years old. I don't feel like I'm 50 years old. I don't think I look terrible for 50 years old, despite the fact that I don't do a lot to take care of myself. Definitely, I don't do things. I think like drinking and smoking and stuff can really like add years onto you unnecessarily. So just avoiding that kind of stuff, I think, is probably beneficial. But then again, there's so much genetics, that I'm lucky. I'm thin and kind of naturally, and I don't have to work at it, which is nice. So I got a freebie there at least.
I mean, I don't know. I think that's debatable too. Like, I think a lot about that because I used to be very overweight, and like the stuff you say to yourself when you're very overweight, it's fascinating, like the way the mind works and adapts. But genetics is definitely a part of it. But I've also found like people that I've talked to that have been thin their entire lives, like a lot of them just had good eating habits from day one. Like they learn their body better, and they just were raised in an environment where they figure that it's like a subconscious thing. It's just like a learned behavior for them on the amount to eat correctly. And then I had learned the wrong amount to eat in my behavior. Yeah.
Well, the beauty of relationships in life, which ultimately I think relationships are the most important thing in the universe, and ultimately relationship with God, I think, is, the biggest and most important relationship. But anyway, I think in my life and for my health, I've really benefited from the relationship with my wife. We've known each other since we're 10 years old. She's very fitness conscious. She's very food conscious. And so she's taking care of me a lot, and what she brings into the house has had a huge influence on my health. So I've kind of gotten, I've lucked out that I haven't had to worry about as much, because I have my partner in life. She's, totally on top of that kind of stuff in a way that I never was. And I kind of, just by association, I get to reap the benefits of that.
That's amazing, right? When your partners like have different strengths and can see, that's why you're in weight and healthy, is because she's making sure you get the right macro.
It's absolutely my wife. And there's so many things. Yeah. So we've, been together over 30 years as a couple, and your personalities and characteristics kind of meld after a while. And there are a lot of things I can see in myself that are her, definitely. I don't see a lot.
Do you have kids?
Yeah, we have 4 kids, and she's an adventurer, and she's put up with a lot. We've had four children, all 4 born in different states along the journey, Yeah. So I have one daughter who's a student at the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, and then 3 boys below that.
Oh, nice. Any of them working at Firefly?
One of my eldest son, he's not working here. He does projects here. He's a student at the University of Texas at Austin, so he comes and does some side projects here with some of the engineers here. But I don't think any of them are really going to be rocket scientists, which is okay because there are all kinds of cool things to do in the world. But at least maybe they caught the spirit of doing cool things in the world.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
How has your faith like helped with your business or connected with your business at all?
It's everything. I mean, I'm a big believer in providence. I don't think there are accidents in the world. I think I'm built to do this on a number of levels. And I just really think one of the biggest goals in life is just to kind of understand God's will and align yourself with it. And if you're doing that, then it's just the most natural state of being to be in, and it just feels right, despite all the hardships and everything else. You persevere through all that because you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, and it's just super empowering. And along the way, I've definitely seen miraculous things. I don't think we should all be like looking around for miracles and things like that to motivate us. But I can say along the way, I had some just extraordinary experiences I can look back on and just say, here's a day where God was just like, okay, son, I'm gonna show you that I'm involved. And those things I'm very grateful because they do have a way of sustaining you through other situations where you're just down, and you can look back on that and you just saw kind of the hand of God involved, and you know that you can have that confidence that's always there. So I don't think there's no way if I had not become a believer that I could have done any of these things, or I think even really led a productive life, frankly. This didn't happen for me until a little bit later. I was like 23 years old when I had my kind of conversion experience, and just in a very unexpected way. I really wasn't looking for it. I wasn't in any bad situation. It was like grabbed me and said, "Okay, things are going to be different now. We're going to go do this." And that was kind of the first miraculous experience that just kind of set me on my way. So it's really, really influenced me too in other ways, like just building teams and working with people. Few core things I believe, that all people pretty much have equal value in God's eyes. And when you look at every person that way, you could easily I have a PhD from Princeton, and I've raised hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm such that really doesn't make me any better in God's eyes than the guy here who's cleaning the toilet or whatever. We're all just a bunch of guys and gals trying to go do a really cool thing. And the other thing is, I think it's super important is that to realize that I think God put us all here to build each other up, not tear each other down. And then there are lots of inclinations to get gossipy and to look at people's faults and to verbalize that, and to always have that voice in your conscience and in your mind that says, you are here to build people up. I came here to build people up, and you're going to follow in that tradition. I think that's very impactful in how you interact with people and how you can ultimately build strong teams that are based on strong relationships and respect. People feel it.
Yeah. When you feel like you're in line with your purpose and what you're supposed to be doing, and like all of a sudden the hindsight becomes really clear and you realize you're on this track, and that's like the best feeling in the world, like feeling in sync with life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it all starts with kind of, I think, just being obedient and getting up every day and go and sloughing off the bad any of the bad thoughts that may be in your mind and going out and doing it. So, one thing one kind of habitual thing I do every day is I get up, and there have been times literally where I've had to like take the left arm and throw it out of the bed to like get the body to roll out, just because it's just like, I mean, I've had so many, I've been getting, like getting sued by people, getting, just all kinds of things. And it's just like, it's the weight. But anyway, one thing I do every day is I get up and I neatly make my bed. And for me, it's a statement to like the universe that like, I'm here and I'm very purposefully gonna, put things in order today. And I'm not just gonna drag my butt through life. I'm gonna go out with a good attitude, a constructive attitude. And that's been really good for me, because as I'm doing that, it just makes that go through my head every day. That simple little thing. I'm gonna put this in order, and I'm not like a neat freak or anything, believe me. You should see the inside of my car. But just that purposefully doing that, it just kind of sets the tone for me every day. It reminds me of how I should think about things in that day going forward.
I do that too. Yeah. My dad was in the Air Force, and so he taught us to do that. And I did it for a while, and then I didn't do it for a while. And then I heard this YouTube general giving a graduation speech, and he says, if you want to change the world, start by making your bed. So you got all these kids out there that are like, I'm going to move here and become this type of person, or go to this country and serve, or do this or that. He's like, well, you're not even waking up and making your bed like consistently every morning. And that just stuck with me. And so it's been about 4 or 5 years since I started again. But waking up every day, getting out of bed, making the bed, and then when you get home, getting home to a made bed is the best thing ever.
Yeah, there's a lot of this. We're interesting creatures. There's just a lot of things that subliminally that go through our mind by our environment. And I'm very purposeful in putting together environments like our company. I think if you come here, you'll see, cool symbols and images and colors and different types of media playing in different things like that. Because I think we are influenced by what we see around us pretty more strongly than maybe we would think.
Yeah, and I'm relocating out to Texas in the middle of this coming year. So we were just out there a couple times, taking a look at different places, different cities. We kind of like the Plano area. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I think it's quite a few hours from Austin. It's probably like 7 or 8 hours, I think. But
well, did you look at Austin?
We looked at the home prices in Austin.
It's been going up, yeah.
Yeah. And
I don't know if you've seen in the media that Elon is supposedly moving everything.
I did.
Yeah.
He said he's moving the companies, and he compared like California to like someone who had gotten like fat and lazy or something.
Yeah. Well, I'm a Pathfinder. I was the first one here to Austin. We'll see what happens.
So as we start to wrap up, I was just curious. I remember that, hearing specifically Elon talk about like the cost per pound coming down being like a critical factor. Do you have an estimate of what the cost per pound today is to get something into space, and where is it going?
Yeah, I mean, it varies from about, let's say $5,000 a pound to $1,000 a pound is kind of the range now. Now, as you get into the bigger and bigger rockets, you can lower the cost per pound to orbit. But, that's one place that I disagree with Elon, I think, in that it's not all about the bigger rocket. You can think about the analogy between transportation here. How many people are going to jump on the city bus, which can carry 100 people, versus dial up the Uber, right? So the Uber is going to be more expensive. Oh, no one should ever use Uber. No, it's not the way it works. Schedule, going to the right place, are important to a lot of people. For some people, the bus works just fine. But that's, I think, a really real analogy for what's going on in space. It's not just about building a bigger bus. It's also serving customers that have a different type of requirements that are more important than just the cost. Cost is important, but it's not the only thing that's important. And indeed, for some customers, it's of secondary importance to going where they want to go, when they want to go.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you think about like the bus or subway systems, they get you near where you want to be. And unless if you have someone else, you don't have two legs like in in
Yeah,
space to walk your equipment around. So you've got to figure out a way to get it to the exact location, uh, like
yeah,
last mile delivery.
yeah. And you have to go stand and wait at the bus stop or whatever too. And you may not want to do that. In some cases you may, but so I think there's a lot of room for a lot of different size vehicles and multiple players in this business for sure.
And so so you guys are focused on like the exact positioning. That's what you want to do?
We want to do small to medium size payloads, but all the whole end-to-end transportation. Like I said, Elon and Jeff are focused on the very big payloads. So there's this whole area of small to medium that's really vacant right now. And we want to build a SpaceX-like company that's addressing that market that is not adequately served by those big rockets and spacecraft that those other two guys are building. So one of the advantages is the time and the place, convenience. But there are other advantages to what we're doing. Some customers just don't want to ride with other customers. They're sensitive about it. Take, for example, military. They very much just want their own vehicle. They don't want other people walking around looking at it while other things are being put around it. The other people that have something so valuable that they don't want it to be jeopardized by someone else's thing sitting right next to it that does a backflip and runs into theirs or something. So there's just all kinds of scenarios like that where that more dedicated kind of white glove service is better. But then even for deploying large numbers of satellites, that's where the medium launch vehicle can actually be competitive with the large launch vehicle too. Because say you want to put 1,000 satellites up in space, but you want them distributed all around the Earth. You don't want to go up and just puke out 1,000 in one spot, and then like how do they all get distributed? That can be challenging. So if you can instead divide it up in 10 flights of 100 each and do it with a smaller launcher and put them in their proper planes, that could actually be a more efficient and economical way to do even large scale deployments. So I hope that answers your question, but it's just about, there is no one size fits all approach for space access.
So I was curious. I've been asking this question to a couple people. I'm just a fan of space. I am not like a space engineer type person, but I was curious to know, do you think that Mars will be like colonized with 100+ people, or do you think, I'm going to ask you which one's going to come first? So Mars colonized with 100+ people, or like large like space hotels that have like gravity? Which is going to come first, if you had to guess?
I think neither. I think colonization of the moon will happen first. And I think colonization of the moon will be a precursor to those two other scenarios that you mentioned. Now, the two amazing guys in the world out there, Jeff and Elon, are going to achieve the latter two things, the things that you mentioned. Jeff will focus on building the large scale infrastructure around the Earth. I've heard him talk about the actual surface of the Earth being the vacation destination in the future. But all the rest of us are out living in space, working in space, and he's really set his mind and his wealth on achieving that. Elon, on the other hand, has always been about Mars, and I think I have no doubt that in our lifetime that we'll see SpaceX-led missions to Mars. How things evolve beyond that is anyone's guess, but I think those are things you can expect. But with NASA's re-emphasis on the moon, learning to live in space for both the space station scenario and the remote Mars scenario, the moon provides a great learning environment for that. So I think that's why we'll see that kind of flourish first.
Are they going to be able to like simulate gravity on the moon?
Well, you have about 1/6 the gravity of Earth on the moon already, and believe me, some gravity is a whole different animal than no gravity at all. at least when you put things down, they'll stay there, even if with 1/6 of the gravity, they won't just things floating all over the place. So I don't think there's a need to simulate gravity. It's there, and it'll be adequate.
Excellent. So we're coming up on time, and I know that we had a hard stop at 1 hour, so I just want to be respectful. Is there any topics or things that we didn't get out there that you want to get out there to the world?
I think the one other topic I'd bring up, and it's really one of my big motivations for Firefly, is one of the most important things in the world, and one of the blessings of being an American is opportunity. And that's why what America was founded on was opportunity. And this is obviously currently a very hot political topic. But for me, opportunity is about jobs. And, we approach it in different ways. The government tries to get involved in, building big government institutions and things to create jobs. I think it's a wrong way to do it. I think the commercial sector is much more efficient in providing more opportunities for more people. My father was a 20th century auto worker, blue collar auto worker, and that provided a really great, lower middle class, maybe home environment for us, where we could build a family, could have a home. And so one of my motivations for Firefly, and indeed one of my obligations, I think, is to create 21st century jobs. And that's what companies like Firefly and the other space companies are doing. The opportunities that my father had are completely different than the opportunities today. A lot of the opportunities that he was pursuing are offshore now. But space, aerospace, these are things that Americans are still preeminent in, and we can build superior companies to what anyone else in the world is doing. So I think that's the other big part of space is for some reason there's something intrinsic in everyone that makes space interesting. It's just kind of in our DNA. But practically speaking, it creates great opportunity for the next generation, which is, ultimately the jobs, and that opportunity are foundational to families, which are foundational to democratic society. So it's one of the other big picture things I'd like to bring up.